To help us understand the current situation in Ukraine, let's look back at its modern history. As the dust settled after World War I, Ukraine was defeated and divided, and the Soviets controlled much of the country. In 1922, Ukraine, along with Russia, became the founding members of the Soviet Union. Fast forward to 1932 when the Great Famine began, and up to 10 million Ukrainians starved to death. Part of the reason why it got so bad was because of the policies of the new head of the Communist Party, Joseph Stalin. Then came the Great Terror. 2 waves of Stalinist political repression and persecution resulted in the killing of some 681,000 people, including 80% of the Ukrainian cultural elite and 3/4 of all the Ukrainian Red Army's higher-ranking officers. Then came the outbreak of World War II. German armies invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, beginning 4 straight years of non-stop total war. In the Battle of Kiev, Axis troops encircled and laid siege to the capital city. More than 600,000 Soviet soldiers were killed or taken captive there. The total losses inflicted upon the Ukrainian population during the war are estimated between 5 and 8 million, including over 500,000 Jews killed by Nazi death squads. More than 700 cities and towns and 28,000 villages were destroyed. Material losses comprised an estimated 40% of Ukraine's national wealth. But Ukraine bounced back and its economy boomed. Industrial output doubled from 1940 to 1955. Before long, Ukraine was a European leader in industrial production and an important center of the Soviet arms and high-tech research industries. Ukraine was producing many prominent Soviet sports players, scientists, and artists over this period, as well as much of the Soviet leadership, including Leonid Brezhnev, who ousted Khrushchev and became the Soviet leader from 1964 to 1982. On the 26th of April 1986, a reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, resulting in the worst nuclear reactor accident in history. The Soviet Union began to break apart under the weight of the War of Laws, which was the constant conflict between the Soviet federal government and its various republics, who were each seeking greater autonomy. On August 24, 1991, the Ukrainian parliament officially declared independence. But then the economy immediately sank into depression and lost 60% of its GDP from 1991 to 99. A new currency, the hryvnia, was introduced in 1996. The economy was stabilized by the end of the 90s. Corruption under Ukraine's second president set the stage for the 2004 ascendance of then Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych to the presidency in elections that the Ukrainian Supreme Court ruled were rigged. Yanukovych was then thrown out of power in the peaceful Orange Revolution in favor of opposition leaders Viktor Yushchenko and Yulia Tymoshenko, who became president and prime minister. Yanukovych then regained the prime ministership in 2006, but lost a snap election just a year later that saw Tymoshenko become prime minister again. This map of those 2007 election results showed just how divided Ukraine is politically. Then came the January 2009 natural gas crisis, in which Russia stopped supplying gas to Ukraine in the middle of winter. Since Ukraine is itself the main supply route to much of Europe, this was a pretty big problem. Tymoshenko eventually signed an agreement to reopen the pipes, but not before Ukraine incurred major economic losses. As a result of the political fallout, Yanukovych, who just does not go away, was elected president again in 2010. And in October 2011, Tymoshenko was sentenced to 7 years in prison for abuse of office because she signed the natural gas deal with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In 2012, the European Union and Ukraine began negotiations for it to join the 28-nation group. President Yanukovych urged the parliament to adopt laws so that Ukraine would meet the EU's criteria. But Russia does not want this to happen, and responded by starting a trade war that resulted in a 10% decline in Ukrainian export revenue from the previous year, or $1.5 billion in losses, bringing us to the 3-month-old Euromaidan protests, which began at the end of 2013, when Yanukovych, who was feeling the economic pressure, abruptly suspended efforts to join the EU. He then turned around and signed an agreement with Putin, who offered $15 billion in financial aid and a 33% discount on Russian natural gas. As a result, the protests have escalated and become more violent, with many now calling for the ouster of Yanukovych and a rejection of the Russian deal in favor of a complete embrace of Europe. Thanks for watching this episode of The Daily Conversation. If you feel all caught up on Ukraine like I do, hit that like button so we can help spread this video. For TDC, I'm Bryce Plank.